that are connected to the soil that has
Good evening, Earth. This is Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting Medusa's crown.
Metrics, intellectual metrics, creating language and words to be able to
Okay, this evening I'm just going to continue with the rye coloration, working on each kernel with the start of a highlight and shadow side. I have a little bit of yellow ochre and a little bit of sienna mixed up. Here we go.
Privileged to be in this body at this time. And I also want to dedicate this talk to my good friends Toby Hemingway and Dehinda. There are two great brothers who have passed on, and I think a lot of us here were greatly influenced and touched by their kindness and their mentorship. So, this is an artist friend of ours made this painting for me, and this is really describes towards the end of my talk is the connection between mushrooms and bees. Now, I like this painting a lot because these are actually all taxonomically correct. And being a mycologist, it's really important that we don't have Smurf mushrooms, up on the screen. So I'm going to rock and roll. I will have to go through this fairly quickly because it's important that I get to the end. And I only have an hour and 15 minutes to do an hour and 45-minute talk. So here's a recent article that came out in Science. And unfortunately, over 58% of the ecosystems on this planet now have fallen below the threshold of species diversity that can maintain those ecosystems and the residents they're in, which means external inputs need to be brought in order to sustain the life systems of the populations. We have entered into 6X, the sixth greatest extinction event known in the history of life on this planet. But this extinction event is not caused by an asteroid impact. It's caused by an organism, by us. We're not only the cause of this extinction event, but we're likely to be one of its victims. So it's an all-hands-on-deck moment, folks, and we need to have actionable, ecologically rational, and scalable solutions. This is really important. We can't remain philosophers and idealists. We have to have boots on the ground. We have to be able to put into place remedies and solutions that are sustainable that will have a dramatically positive impact. And investing in biodiversity, I think, is absolutely key to this. So, this is a representation, this is the actual pictograph from northern Algeria, then re-represented here, of the bee man. It's a bee shaman figure from 5000 BCE, about 7,000 years ago. And it's very interesting because the artist was clearly trying to communicate that the artist is pretty excited about mushrooms, don't you think? But amazingly, in 4 peer-reviewed articles, the authors dared not suggest what these mushroom-like shapes were. Is it a representation of mycophobia, the irrational fear of fungi? Even in academia, when you mention mushrooms, lots of people make a bad joke about being in the dark, being fed, what. And so that sort of hindrance of not scientists being reluctant to talk about something that is verboten in academia was really my opportunity, because I've always been attracted to that which has been forbidden. And so when I was told that mushrooms were scary and dangerous and could hurt my twin brother when I pelted him with puffballs, when I was 5 years old, I said to myself, "Thank you, Mom." And but this is unfortunate because it also has permeated into academia. Interestingly, mushrooms were very much used in beers, in fermented honey as well as beer. But the Beer Purity Act in Bavaria in 1516 specifically banned mushrooms. This, I think, is a struggle between monotheism and polytheism. The Germanic tribal people were celebrating in the forests, and monotheism, where Christianity came in with the church and said you had to go to church in order to see God. And I think that is representation of that division in philosophies. But going back, this is 400 years BCE. This is a codolith showing Demeter giving Persephone a mushroom. And upon ingesting the mushroom, Persephone goes into a deep sleep. In Greek mythology, this is the onset of winter. And then upon the spring, she comes from the underworld, from Hades. She comes onto the landscape again, and that is the return of longer days, sunshine, and the rebirth of plants. So, interestingly, the way that Demeter is presenting this mushroom, for those of you who've ingested psilocybin mushrooms, this is the sort of rite of passage and respect. When you present a psilocybin magic mushroom to a person, it's take this. This is special. You know, this is not like a porcini where you put on a table. This is like, this is really special. So 450 BCE, approximately, Hippocrates was using amadou mushrooms for cauterizing wounds, and Dioscorides mentioned agarikon. Now, amadou is actually what this hat is made from. This is a birch polypore. It's a very hard mushroom. And this mushroom, when you put it into water, lye water, it delaminates into a fabric called mycelium. You'll see lots of mycelium. So this mushroom and lye water become the fabric. And some ladies in Transylvania are still making these hats. Now, there's only 5 hat makers currently. There used to be 20. It's a thread of knowledge that goes back thousands of years that it fortunately has not broken, but how many threads of knowledge from our ancestors have been broken because of disease, war, famine, poverty, accidents, whatever. But this mushroom is known as a fire starter mushroom. It enables you to carry fire for days. And moreover, you can hollow this mushroom inside, put embers of a fire, and then rekindle it. There's no doubt that we all came from Africa. We had 2 migrations in Neanderthals and then Homo sapiens. About 40,000 to 80,000 years ago, there was an amazing enlargement of our prefrontal cortex. This speaks to a different lecture that I'm giving elsewhere on microdosing and the evolution of consciousness using psilocybin mushrooms. But the amadou mushroom allowed not only the portability of fire, but revolutionized warfare. Because this was the punk that started, that would make flint spark rifles ignite the gunpowder. Moreover, interestingly, this was used by beekeepers to smoke hives. Amadou also is the first mushroom ever to be found to have an antiviral effect against the tobacco mosaic virus. So very interesting. And I think that mushrooms, plants, animals become shamanistically important with indigenous peoples because they have a multiplicity of benefits. And indeed, I think this is one example of that. So, amadou, because of its flammability, was used for cauterizing wounds. And another mushroom that you'll be hearing a lot about is called agarikon, that Dioscorides first described as a treatment against consumption, later thought to be known as tuberculosis. So, I'd like to give credit to my teachers. This is Dr. Michael Bugh from the Evergreen State College, Alexander Smith from the University of Michigan, Dr. Daniel Stuntz, University of Washington, and Kit Skase from Post Falls, Idaho. These 3 individuals adopted me sort of as their mascot when I was about 18 years of age. They've all passed on now, except for Michael Bugh. It's all the more interesting they took me under their wing because these are basically politically conservative individuals, very much concerned about the interest in magic mushrooms. But all the more interesting they took me under their wing because when I was 19, this is what I looked like. Your suspicions are now confirmed. Okay, so the old growth forest is where I spend a lot of time. For 3 years, I set chokers in the woods. I cut down the old growth forest. I'm a strong believer in the School of Hard Knocks. And I'm also walk in academia. So, but going and repaying the old growth forest is something that's really important to me. So on Sundays, this is where my wife and I go to church. But let's look at a cross-section of an ecosystem. You have saprophytic fungi that are breaking down wood. You have endophytic fungi that are growing inside of trees, literally, and plants. Literally hundreds of species of endophytic fungi now have been found to be part of plants as part of their host defensive resistance against pathogens. You have mycorrhizal fungi, most of you know about that expands the rhizome and the rhizosphere enormously by many orders of magnitude, helping the absorption of minerals and nutrients. The parasitic fungi, which are like the wolves, calling the genome and actually helping screen out the weaker individuals and helping to fortify the genome of the survivors. So, but it is now known that all plants are part fungus. These are giant consortia, giant guilds. And it was thought for a long time that when you do thin sections under the microscope, that when you saw these fine filaments growing in association with plants, that they were infections. But now we know that the majority of these actually are endophytic fungi that are helping the plants survive. So this is important, especially for botanical medicine. You do an extract of a plant. What's the benefit from the fungal endophytes that are in the plant versus the plant themselves? Can you actually have a plant without endophytic fungi present? You can under sterile culture, but you'd have a lot of effort in order to produce a fungus-free clone in vitro. So the way of nature is a plurality of these fungi, consortia, that are working together in concert. Excellent book is Mycorrhizal Symbiosis. It shows you the expansion. The majority of all this is mycelium. And an excellent article came out 2 years ago. It's a very simple experiment, and I'll quickly describe it. There's 5 bean plants. They're in separate pots. They exposed the first bean plant to aphids, and that bean plant upregulated alkaloids that had anti-aphid properties, part of its defense system. The 4 other plants, remote from contact, did not. They repeated the experiments, and they put all the bean plants in the same soil, so the roots would interconnect, and the fungal networks would also interconnect. When they introduced the aphids to the first plant, what happened? All the other 4 plants, remote from contact, upregulated the same alkaloids that were anti-aphid. This showed definitively that there's a communication system underground that is where the community of plants are benefiting from the fungal networks that are alerting them to a pathogen or a parasite on the near event horizon. So this is how quickly the mycelium grows. That was 10 days in a petri dish. And the mycelium is beautifully organized and has many different forms. But many people don't realize that fungi eat rocks. The mycelium consumes rocks, takes the minerals, and then channels them to plants. And so I would see these rocks in the forest, and I thought, that's interesting, there's moisture down there, that contact. No, that's actually a lens of mycelium that's consuming these rocks. So fungi were the first organisms to come to land over different estimates, 600 million years ago, 1.2 billion years ago. Plants soon followed. Plants and fungi allied together to form lichens. And so in the mycorrhizal fungi soon enabled plants to march across the landscape. So we take wood chips, we add mycelium, lots of things happen, but ultimately we generate soil. Fungi, the grand molecular disassemblers of nature, the soil magicians. And worms specifically chase mycelium. So myceliated habitats in vermiculture, worms specifically choose myceliated substrates over those that are not. I like to show this one because it shows the output from mycelium as it breaks down wood or straw or any other type of plant material. What people are quite surprised and don't know, that 100 kilos of dried sawdust will give you 20 kilos of water. The mycelium inhales oxygen, exhales carbon dioxide, breaks down plant material, combines hydrogen with oxygen, forming H2O. The mycelium produces enormous amounts of water. That's why there's sweat piles, puddles around compost piles. And so in doing so, hydrates its habitat in advance of contact. So this is a really important article that came out on the unfortunate logging practices that's pushing monoculture and destroying the mycosphere, destroying the resident saprophytic fungi, because you don't have a variegated canopies. You end up with similar age trees, for instance, and so you don't have the cycling of fungi that you would normally have. What is really interesting to me is that 70% of soils are composed of microbes, but 30% of the soil mass is fungal. So that's an extraordinary amount of fungi that many of you know from no-till how important these fungal networks are. The mycelium is some of my electron micrographs in response to 4 primary environmental stimuli: introduction of water causes evaporation, drop in temperatures, number 2, As the mycelium comes up to the surface because it's moisture, it exhales carbon dioxide, inhales oxygen. That's number 3. And surprisingly, the 4th one is light. 99% of all mushroom-forming fungi require light. If they don't have light, the mushrooms will not form. Even though they have no chlorophyll, they are extremely phototropic and photosensitive. So upon that, then the primordia begin to form, and they quickly enlarge into a mushroom within a matter of 3 to 4, 5 days. Now, why are mushrooms so feared? Why are they so misconstrued? Why are they so underappreciated? Well, I think for a lot of different reasons. In our viewscape, as we walk through life, we have daily, weekly, monthly, yearly encounters with plants and animals. We have a familiarity factor because we become acquainted with them. But something that is so potent, that can kill you, that can feed you, that can send you on a spiritual journey, and is only up and gone in 4 or 5 days, is very ephemeral, very temporary. And so it's natural for humans to avoid that which they don't understand that is so potent. This is why I think the field of mycology has lagged behind some of the other sciences in not being fully appreciated. I'm fascinated by how mushrooms rot. Here's a mushroom, russula, in the old growth forest in a meadow. And a few days later, lots of sporulation that's occurring, spores are germinating. And then a few days later, the mycelium goes subterranean, goes underground. The mycelium, as it grows underground, has bundles of nuclei, sometimes hundreds of nuclei per cell, streaming through the mycelial networks. This is a movie by my friend Patrick Hickey, and before he made this, we didn't know that these big clusters of nuclei would travel in concert. Now, if you look very closely, they don't all go in the same direction. So as few of them go in the other direction. So in a swath of mycelium the breadth of my hands, my arms here, you can have hundreds of millions of end branchings. Now, the internal part of the mycelium is only 2 nuclei per cell, typically. But at the tips, there can be hundreds. Think of them as little scientists. And at the tips, they're encountering new potential food sources, new toxins, new food, new plants, whatever. If there is a recombination of genetic material that expresses a new enzyme that successfully captures that food and breaks it down, what happens? The mother mycelium becomes educated. So these are not only externalized lungs, externalized digestive membranes, but they also have the ability to learn. It can act at exceptional paces. So I live in Washington State, in the southern region of the Puget Sound. Here's the Columbia River. We're going to do a fly down here to the largest organism in the world. Is a mycelial mat. 1,665 football fields, 2,200 acres in size. And think of it, and it's 1 cell wall thick. Right on the other side of the cell wall are hundreds of millions of microbes, many of which want to consume the mycelium. How is it that a membrane, 1 cell wall thick, and direct contact with hundreds of millions of other microbes per gram can achieve the largest mass of any organism in the world? It's because of epigenesis and the fact that these are in constant biomolecular communication with this ecosystem, learning strategies to be able to survive, and also predetermining the ecosystems that give rise to the plants, that give rise to the canopies, that create the debris fields that feed the mycelium. These are mothering membranes whose interest is in the long-term survival of the ecosystems, not for its own individual survival. Of course, that comes with it, but in order to have a plurality and biodiversity in the ecosystem is absolutely critical for these fungal networks to be able to thrive. Whew, that was a tongue. So in this case, it's the honey mushroom, Armillaria ostoyi. And I like to go back on this because I hired an airplane on a Boeing field. I flew there twice, and we couldn't find it. And we went back, and in the scientific literature, there's a latitude and longitude reading, so we went back, we were right on top of it, but we weren't high enough. So we flew back again, and I spiraled up in this airplane. We got up to about 15,000 feet. And I'm in a little tiny canvas-covered airplane, literally. It's a bush pilot from Alaska. And I said to the pilot, I think I'm going to faint. We just came from sea level to 15,000 feet in an hour. And he goes, me too. I said, okay, I'm going to get a photograph first, but... So this is the best photograph of the largest organism in the world. I beat National Geographic on this one. Anyhow, so the mycelial network, is designed to resist from catastrophia. There's no cell place that you can break the mycelium that'll harm it. It's one of the few organisms in nature where you disturb it, it grows more vigorously. In fact, this is a technique by mushroom growers to scratch their beds, to disturb the mycelium, because you get another flush of mushrooms. So it's we separated from fungi 650 billion years ago. There's a new super kingdom called Opisthokonta that joins Animalia and fungi together, because we exhale carbon dioxide, we inhale oxygen. Many of our best antibiotics against bacteria come from fungi, but very few good antifungal antibiotics are out there because they tend to harm us because of our closer evolutionary relationship. So the mycelium also then can be parasitized by bacteria, but a minor population of bacteria out there are actually mutualistic, that the mycelium pre-selects in order to fortify its immunity against bacterial pathogens, using the bacteria's defense mechanism against other bacteria. So the mycelium sets up guilds of microbes, microbiomes. And some of you were in my talk yesterday, I showed you next-gen sequencing, where there's 1,000-fold difference in the genera of bacterial populations between two different mushroom species grown on the very same material. So we do know they select out microbiomes that are favorable to the plant communities that give rise to the ecosystem that can feed the fungi. So the mycelium sweats these little droplets, lots of water, as I mentioned, but also in them is antibacterial, antiviral, messenger compounds, the whole slew of extremely interesting constituents. There's over 240,000 novel molecules that comprise a mushroom, many of which are not found elsewhere in nature. The mycelium, when it grows, is tenacious. It prevents erosion. This rhizomorph here of mycelium, I cut off a centimeter, weighed it, and then weighed this. There's a 30,000 to 1 difference in the mass, which means 1 centimeter held 30,000 times this mass. When I could have made this 1 millimeter, that would have been 300,000. So myceliated substrates, as we know from no-till, prevents erosion. Those fungal networks, tend to retain the soil and prevent loss of nutrients. The quickly diverging rhizomorphic mycelium is, for me, as a cultivator, is what I relish to see. These rapidly forking rhizomorphs. This is where epigenesis is occurring. This is where polynucleation is occurring. The vigor of growth is just extraordinary. So my wife Dusty and I spent a lot of time in the old growth forest. And the old growth forest is going to become a treasure trove of our genomic library. We have about 700 species and strains in our cultural library to date. And we march these things out. Some of them we preserve just for posterity. There's not enough hours in the day to do what we need to do to explore the beneficial ecological and medicinal properties of these fungi. But I am really fascinated with decomposition. This is my manly man photograph. When I was 19, 20 years old, I suffered from testosterone poisoning. A lot of you young men, and for that matter, women also. You do dangerous things. So the most dangerous job in the world was being a logger setting chokers. So I go, well, that's for me. And so I did that, and then 3 guys in my crew got killed, and they wanted to make me the hooker. That means the top dog in the crew. And I decided to go back to college. So one mushroom resident in the old growth forest is called agarikon. It is Fomitopsis officinalis. It's the longest living mushroom in the world. It's a perennial polypore. The amadou grow for 3 or 4 years. This grows for up to 100. These are annual growth rings. I was very interested, and have been, with agarikon. I wrote several articles. And then the National Geographic, gave me a Green Innovator Award. And they're fascinated by my interest in this rare mushroom called agarikon. Now, my dear professor, Michael Bugh, who I showed a photograph of, he goes out in the old growth forest 20 times a year. He found his first agarikon last year. That's how rare it is. And he's an expert. So finding agarikon is not easy. When you do find it in a valley, oftentimes there are satellite colonies and other trees, as one would expect. So National Geographic wanted to do a story on me on a search for agarikon, so they could send a photojournalist out. And we decided, well, why don't we go up the inland passage of Desolation Sound in British Columbia, And they said, well, we don't want you to take us to a site where there's already an agaricon. We want to find a new one. I went, oh. Well, National Geographic, I'm like, great, they're coming out. Oh, bad news, they want to find a new agaricon. They said, well, how likely will we find it? And I go, oh, 50-50, maybe. But the reason for that is we got a motor sailor, and a Zodiac. We went up the Desolation Sound, and these things look like giant beehives, and where bald eagles are in trees, oftentimes you find agaricon. So you look for living snag, bald eagles. And so I took 10 of my friends, high-powered binoculars, and we scanned the horizon. Now, we left at like 7:30 in the morning. And by 11:30 at night, we're going up, and that morning, 4 hours later, we're going up Desolation Sound, and we have retina burn. Because look at the tree there, nothing there, tree there, nothing there, tree there, nothing there. You do that hundreds of times, and you're like, dizzy. And so the photojournalist was getting pretty impatient. Paul, you promised me. And I said 50-50, dude, So we're going along, and so our skipper said, this is not doing too well. It's lunchtime. Let's go over to our First Nations site where there's some interesting pictographs. We don't know what they mean, but let's go over there and have lunch. Now, this is a 30-foot overhang. You can bring canoes, or a boat right up into this flat area. It's, used to run red with salmon. The perfect place to get out of the weather and also have access to the water and fish. So we're motoring over there, and then Jimmy, one of our colleagues, goes, there's one. And sure enough, we found one. This is amazing because this agaricon was attached to an upper limb. It fell, it hit this limb, it teeter-tottered, then it regrew its mycelium back into the tree, and then it grew 2 legs. So it was a really extraordinary agaricon. We got really
All right, that's a pretty good session. That was.
So, the photojournalist was really excited.
It's a little bit slow going.
And,
but
there's an interesting
it's
legend
pure oil paint
from the
without any
Hardy
medium in it.
people and
I want it
first,
very opaque
Northwest Coast,
and smoothly
first
textured
peoples,
for this portion.
about the origination myth of
But I think I'm going to do another
and the
session
Hardy
just to
culture in
continue out the
particular.
rye
This
stalk
is Raven,
of her
and she's
leg
traveling
and all
on
of the
a canoe
kernels
to
on
see
her
eternally.
right
And no one
leg
can help
and
Raven
shadow
succeed
part
in
of
finding
that
her
leg.
genitalia.
So I'm going
She's
to take a short break and we'll pick it up
sexless
here in a
at this
minute.
point, except one. We take a stainless steel
Take
tube,
two.
a small amount of tissue is taken out, and then we get it in the culture. So my culture library is probably my greatest personal material asset. If my family, my employees are taken care of, and there's an earthquake or a fire, this is my culture library. Everything else can burn. Everything else can be destroyed. My genomic library cannot be replaced very easily, except for many lifetimes, and many of these ecosystems have already been decimated. So we've lost the genomic library of agaricon within those ecosystems. So I wrote an article, and 2 articles in Herbalgram in June of 2001. And I did a synopsis by doing a literature review of all the articles ever published on the antiviral properties of mushrooms and all the antibacterial properties of mushrooms. 2 consecutive articles, a whopping 1 page long. That's all there was in the scientific literature. I was amazed. Penicillium molds, hundreds and hundreds of articles. And this is all the articles that were ever published on the antiviral and antibacterial properties of mushrooms. And half this page is photographs, right? So I was like, wow, that's bizarre, because mushrooms like to resist rot. They want to sporulate. They're in contact with microbes. How weird that scientists would avoid mushrooms for exploration of novel antimicrobials. Well, that was in June of 2001, and then 9/11 occurred. And a researcher, medical researcher, physician, saw my articles and said, Paul, you should really get involved in the BioShield Biodefense program. I'm going to get you invited. So I was invited, and we started preparing specimens, mushrooms boiled in hot water, mycelial extracts prepared in different ways, water and ethanol. And lo and behold, I submitted, there's so many stories I could tell you. I'll tell you one real quick. I got these research results that came in, Federal Express, from the BioShield, from the Department of Defense. And a Federal package. I'm flipping through them, no activity. This is against smallpox. No activity, no activity, no activity. I get to sample 77. And it said high activity. Sample 79, high activity. Sample 85, high activity. I got really excited. I didn't tell them what the specimens were. They were coded with the laboratory codes. I looked them up, and all those 3 hits were agaricon. Wow, I got real excited, and I was given a colonel physician who was my point of contact, sole point of contact with the BioShield program. So I call him up and say, this is great, we have great results, I can't believe it, 77, 78, 85, hugely active against smallpox. He goes, what results? I go, well, Federal Express just delivered them to me. He goes, you're not supposed to get those, I'm supposed to get those. I said, no problem, I'll photocopy and send them to you. So this went on for a while. We had extraordinary results. Then there is a vetted press release from the Department of Defense. It says we have the best results of more than 200,000 specimens submitted. It's actually over 2 million. You can Google my name, Stamets and Smallpox, in National Public Radio. You'll hear an interview with myself, the Deputy Director of the BioShield Biodefense Program, and the Deputy Director of the FDA. And I was then blurted out, that this means, at my TED Talk, this means that we should save the old growth forest as a matter of national defense. And, whoa! I then, at that moment, learned the significance of sound bites, And the Department of Defense, they loved this, So they had calls coming to me personally from other researchers saying, we are so excited about this. And sure enough, so we had very good results against pox viruses, orthopoxes, vaccinia, variola, which is smallpox. And those of you after 1962, I believe, are no longer vaccinated. So many of you before 1962, after the age of 5 years, you have a smallpox vaccination on your arm. The majority of you don't. You're what we call immunologically naive. If there's a smallpox pandemic, you are extremely susceptible to dying. But there's good news. So we started working with the University of Mississippi, the NCNPR, National Center for Natural Pox Research. We did the same thing, bioguided fractionation. 2 solvents, we split. We did this 5 or 6 years. We found 2 novel anti-smallpox molecules inside of agarikon, more potent than cidofovir, which is the preeminent antiviral drug control. So agarikon is active not only against bacteria, tuberculosis, it's active against viruses, including smallpox. So there's a consortium of many active constituents. This is a real argument for natural medicine. So we identified these new molecules. It took hundreds of thousands of dollars. So with both of these experiments, hundreds of thousands of dollars were expended in order to find these novel molecules resident and naturally produced within these fungi. Well, very quickly, the BioShield program became very concerned about weaponizable flu viruses. And so sure enough, they said, Paul, listen, we have your samples. We would love to test against flu viruses. Is it okay with you? I said, sure, go ahead. And then we hit another big home run. But to give you an idea, 2.5% of the population of the world died in 1918 from H1N1. It's a pig flu. The poultry flu virus, H7N9, recently came through a few years ago. There's a H5N1 has a 60% mortality for those people who get infected. H5N1 is in about 10 locations right now in Asia, causing quarantines, all over Asia, for preventing, because if it combines with pig flu, H1N1 and H5N1 combined, then you have a highly contagious flu virus that will kill the majority of people that get it. And this last flu season, as many of you know, was pretty bad. Just imagine every 60% of those people that had flu would die. So then the poultry virus swept Minnesota and Iowa, H7N9, and a person who has a very large poultry business, I helped out his family with a personal medical issue. And he goes, Paul, listen, we're euthanizing millions and millions of chickens and turkeys. I says, can you send us some of this agarikon? So we sent 50 kilos of agarikon to an organic chicken farmer in Iowa, and they consumed it in their feed. It's just mycelium grown on rice. And those 20,000 chickens never got the virus. It became an oasis of immunity. Now, there's millions and millions and millions of chickens and turkeys were euthanized. And so we had sort of our first little quasi-clinical study, with chickens. So BioShield is 4 different agencies that were involved, including NIH, virology, And Dr. Earl Kern is a virologist, and I'm going to give you a metric here. It's a selectivity index metric. Anything of 2 is over is active. 10 or active means you've got something really potent. That's why many of the antiviral medicines that people take have selectivity indexes of 10 or more. So I just got this data last week, and it's so curious. They tested 2,392 samples from me. I had no idea it was that many. I just kept on sending them in. So I never thought I would speak these words, but I want to personally thank Dick Cheney and George W. Bush for funding this research. Now, I say that a little flippantly, but actually it has a deeper meaning and consequence that I want to lead you to. So I am indebted to the U.S. Defense Department and NIH Virology and the BioShield Biodefense Program, which continued until around 2009. And then one of the researchers, Craig Day, was so excited about our results that he continued the antiviral studies unbeknownst to us until last week, when he told us, you know, Paul, because all he had is the alphanumeric numbers. He goes, the samples were so potent. I was curious. I want to do more tests with them. So we are continuing our relationship now with the Utah State Institute of Antiviral Research, because we have some other extraordinary results against other viruses. So in summary, 2,392 samples. These are the best results. So that's a pretty big data set. The ribavirin is anything over 10 is highly active, 32, 170, yeah, that's positive drug control. And our extracts were in 35% ethanol. This is in vitro human cell assays. You can't put 35% ethanol in contact with living human cells, it'll kill them. So they diluted them 10 to 1, 3.5, 10 to 1 again, 100 to 1 dilution. So these are our results with 100 to 1 dilution of a natural mycelial extract in water and ethanol compared to a pure pharmaceutical drug control. Off the charts, 10 times more oftentimes than the positive drug control active against flu viruses, including agarikon. Agarikon is active not only against smallpox, a DNA virus, but also against flu viruses, which are RNA viruses. From a virological point of view, this is kind of unprecedented, but it's because I think there's many other active molecules resident within these natural wild mushrooms. So we were able to grow them up, and then a combination of 3 of them, and what the selectivity index is 30 times more potent than ribavirin. So this was really exciting for us to get these research results, and then it began to dawn on me that I'm entering into a field of discovery much broader than anything historically ever anticipated, and especially by me. So the first patent issued in 2014. 2014, this patent was submitted in 2004. It meandered and got stopped in the patent office for 10 years. After 3 or 4 years, I got a hold of my patent lawyer. I said, where is my friggin' patent? You file a patent in 2 years or a year, it's up on the patent application homepage. The Department of Defense hijacked my patent because of national security. It took it out of the patent office. We had to do an intergovernmental agency trace and pulled back the patent out of national security. They had to jury it and didn't think it was a big deal, so we got it back, and a universality of opinion of 10 patent examiners approved the patent. Well, that was great, but then the Russians came out from the Vector Institute, and they discovered the same thing I discovered, but eight years later. Well, actually, that's good news, because Vector's like the Fort Detrick of Russia, where they have smallpox. And then another group of scientists also came out and affirmed what I had discovered 8 years later. So that's good. That means other scientists are also validating what I discovered. Okay, so now we're going to get into a little bit more of the science here. As it turns out, there was a shortage of Tamiflu. Many of you know about that. Rumsfeld has an equity interest, in the Tamiflu licensing, and huge amounts of Tamiflu were taken off the market. It comes from the star anise, which is grown primarily in Afghanistan in the Middle East, and it's harvested once a year. You can imagine the supply chain issues. Tamiflu's precursor is a star anise. As it turns out, oyster mushroom mycelium, when exposed to light, can produce the Tamiflu precursor 24/7 in vitro. Light stimulates an antiviral substance coming from mycelium. This was like, whoa, interesting. So the reishi mushroom, we grow lots of that. My friend Dr. Andrew Weil. Reishi has now been sequenced, and the interesting news about this is over 25% more genetic gene expressions in the mycelium than in the mushrooms. The mushrooms are at the end of the life cycle. To get there was a struggle over years, months, and then the mushrooms come up for a few days, disappear. So it's logical that the mycelium has a lot more upregulation needs to defend itself against pathogens at the end of the life cycle. So we explored mushroom extracts versus mycelial extracts. Hands down, the mycelial extracts turn out to be more potent. Okay, all this now leads up to the following story. I don't know how to tell the story except by calling them mycofactors. So all of that, believe it or not, was mycofactor 1. I'm going to take you through a mycofactorial equation that ends with an epiphany that I think is truly paradigm shifting. So just clear your receptor sites now. All of that was just setting the stage of antibacterial, antiviral properties from these mushrooms. So here we go. I'm growing the garden giant mushroom. Several of you were in my workshop yesterday. It grows on the garden and on the ground, grows in wood chips. I have 2 beehives. I go out to my raised beds where I have the garden giant, and I look closely and I can't believe it. But there's bees going from my beehives to my garden giant patch, all sorts of flowering plants. There's a convoy of bees for 40 days in the summertime, from dawn to dusk. And they went to my garden giant patch and they moved the wood chips and they were sipping on the mycelium, the little droplets. And I got really close to my camera and I took these photographs. It took me, hours and hours in a 120-degree attic going through Kodachrome 64 slides to find these 2 slides. I finally found them. And so I published this in Harrowsmith Magazine in 1988 and one of my books in 1999, and thereupon forgot it. Okay? That was mycofactor number 2. So these are experiences in my life. When you string these together, it catalyzes towards a solution. So a beekeeper in Ontario wrote me, said, maybe that's why bees go to sawdust piles in the summertime. Nobody else mentioned it. I forgot about it. I spent a lot of time in the old growth forest, and I'm really fascinated by bears. Bears scratch trees, and when bears scratch trees, resin comes out, and bees are attracted to the true resins for propolis to patch their hives. Well, so that's interesting. I had noted that before. And I'm walking the South Fork of the Hoh River with my wife Dusty, when I like to orienteer. My employees call this Demessian death march. It's not really true. But I don't call it getting lost. I call it being temporarily disoriented, So we're temporarily disoriented, bushwhacking in the old growth forest, beyond the end of the trails, and we go around a corner and we see this bear strike. This is like a bear, boom, one of the best bear strikes I've ever seen. So I thought, wow, this is interesting. This is kind of a teaching moment. So I said, Dusty, this is really interesting because where we live in Kimilchi Point, Washington, they have killed hundreds and hundreds of bears. The timber industry was hired by the Forest Service to kill bears because they caused a polypore mushroom infection of the red-belted polypore. So humans are so good doing exactly opposite their best interests. Now we know that bears bring salmon carcasses and sea salts and minerals from the ocean that helps the trees grow. But they killed all the bears in our area. But I thought, that's interesting. Let's come back to this bear strike in 2 years and let's see what's growing there. Well, 2 years later, it took us about 6 to 8 hours to find this. And there is the bear strike. There's the photograph that I had before. Bear scratches are entry runes for polypore mushrooms, and sure enough, they had that right. The red-belted polypore, a sister species to agaricon, was growing out of the bear scratch. So bear scratches do cause polypore mushrooms to grow. I went, wow, too bad they killed the bears, but academically, I could see where they were coming from. They wanted to protect the timber board feet of lumber by preventing the trees from getting a disease. Okay, mycofactor number 3. Okay, all right, bear scratches provide entry runes for polypore mushrooms. So my friend Louis Schwartzberg is a Nat Geo Walt Disney filmmaker, say, Paul, you know, the bees are really in trouble. What can you do to help the bees overcome colony collapse disorder? And I said, that's really weird, because it rekindled this memory of me having my beehives going after my garden giant mycelium. And I said, really? Let me think about that. So, President Obama came out with a presidential memorandum. Bees are dying from a confluence of stressors: bee nutrition, forage lands, parasites, viruses, pesticides, neonicotinoids, glyphosates interfere with the microbiome of the bees. And so it's a perfect storm of stressors. The bees are the canary in the coal mine, so to speak. Apis mellifera is a European honeybee that was brought over in the 1700s, again in the 1800s. And 80% of our pollination benefits for farmers come from wild bees. 20% comes from cultivated bees, Apis mellifera. So the use of neonicotinoid and insecticides now shows a reduction in sperm quality.
Okay, still quite a few kernels left, so I'm going to take another break, pause it, come back with the third take.
Here's Whole Foods, here's your grocery scientists. And I milked it. I said, stand up now. Have you ever heard of this? Where did you see it? Where was it published? Dead silence. So the international patents have been issued. I call it, I have to name something after myself. The Sturchian mushroom bee hypothesis, and it has a synergistic effect in being helping the bees, and that is mycofactor number 6. I have three minutes left, so okay, this is crazy. We go back to p-cumaric acid. I get a hold of the NIH virology. I said, you sampled over 2,000 samples. I got 77 strains of agarikon. We had 3 that were active. I want to test 77. They wrote me back immediately, said, we not funded by the BioShield program. We won't do bio-guided fractionation for you. You have to send in a pure structure. We're happy to work with you, but the structure you send in, a pure molecule, has to be juried that no one ever discovered it before. And psychologically, does a virologist think it will make sense? So I'm going, they will test more, but I need a molecule. I don't have millions of dollars. I can't do bio-guided fractionation like I did with Scott Franzblau and the University of Mississippi. What am I going to do? And I remembered p-cumaric acid. So then, rather than bio-guided fractionation, Louis Pasteur has a great quote: chance favors the prepared mind. So I did the best of all scientific methods. I guessed. I submitted 20 molecules, 10 of them highly active, more potent than antiviral drug controls, all surrounding p-cumaric acid, which comes from wood, from the mycelium breaking it down. 5 of these molecules are highly active against HPV, and I'm sorry to tell you this, but most of you under the age of 30, 90% of you, are carrying an oncovirus called the human papillomavirus, which is a ticking time bomb that causes cervical cancer in women and other types of cancer as well. There is no good antiviral medicine against HPV. 5 molecules that I discovered, highly active against HPV. I did it in 5 minutes by guessing. Okay, so not on my birthday. But so again, the flu viruses, herpes, norovirus, hepatitis, pox, and also we have polio. And so that is mycofactor number 7. So I want to just introduce to you, there is a mycofactorial equation that I have designed here. There are different factors in my life that have been strung together. And now we know we can limit disease transmission by insects to plants. Think of that. I think we have the gateway now of mitigating all viral vectors that harm plants, by controlling the diseases in the insects prior to transmission. So what's next? What's next is the mycofactorial equation. I leave that to you. Many of you with these ideas will synergize, and you might have epiphanies, happening all over the audience right now. So we are mushroomed. I believe that scientists across disciplines need to work together. Mycodiversity is our biosecurity, and I want to mention that mushrooms, trees, bears, birds, and the bees, we all have evolved to be within the matrix of mycelium. And think of this, for 10,000 years ago, we started agriculture. What did? We deforested. That began to dismantle the immunological networks of nature. I think I found something fundamental to the foundation of nature, that the mycelial networks control the diseases of the inhabitants that exist within those ecosystems. This is truly paradigm shifting. That goes way beyond human health and bees are the second most well-studied animal in the world. So, I can't believe that I discovered this. I'm not really a beekeeper. I'm a mycologist, you know? And for me to discover this when all these other great scientists have been working so hard for literally hundreds of years cumulatively is truly amazing. So I want to end with just a 2-minute, I'm going to be 2 minutes over, 3 minutes over, a 2-minute short movie Louis Schwartzberg and I are putting together. And I want to just suggest to you, let's celebrate decomposition. Let's let it rot. Mycodiversity is biosecurity, and Bill, with your tolerance here, here's a 2-minute movie. But I have constructed something new called the Mycoverse. It's my multi-generational platform for helping people for hundreds of years into the future. So stay tuned on the Mycoverse, because dark matter, the neurons, the mycelium, we all conform and share the same archetype of networking. And so this should be the movie.
Mushroom mycelium represents rebirth, rejuvenation, regeneration. Fungi generate soil that gives life. The task that we face today is to understand the language of nature. My mission is to discover the language of nature of the fungal networks that communicate with the ecosystem. And I believe nature is intelligent. The fact that we lack the language skills to communicate with nature does not impugn the concept that nature is intelligent. It speaks to our inadequacy for communication. If we don't get our act together and come in commonality and understanding of the organisms that sustain us today, not only will we destroy those organisms, but we will destroy ourselves. We need to have a paradigm shift in our consciousness. What will it take to achieve that? If I die trying, and but I'm inadequate to the task to make a course change in the evolution of life on this planet, okay, I tried. The fact is, I tried. How many people are not trying? If you knew that every breath you took could save hundreds of lives into the future, how do you walk down this path of knowledge? Wouldn't you run down that path of knowledge as fast as you could? I believe nature is a force of good. Good is not only a concept, it is a spirit. And so hopefully the spirit of goodness will survive.
Thank you very much, folks.
theory of mine, but I think it should work. Check this out. Look, hey, look. That ain't gonna work. Fuck yeah! It worked. Still gonna smell it. Why? Hey, stop bullshit!
Well, I don't know about HBCG. It seems slow coming. I saw it in Frankfurt, and I was shocked. Have you seen it? It's not at all what I expected. I expected, the height is just like a movie. It's that clear. High definition television is an entirely different way of doing TV. Well, it's much weirder than film. It's a window. It's freakishly three-dimensional. I mean, you can't tear your eyes off of it. You can't believe how intensely real it is. In fact, it's sort of hyper-real in some way. To the issue of virtual reality, I don't know, I was a speaker at SeaGrass last August, and at one point I turned to Brenda Laurel and I said, I think we can stop hyping virtual reality. It appears to have attained liftoff speed because, Soft Image, Disney, they were all there with mega $1 million outlays, and they haven't yet figured out how to deliver it. But it may not, it may be cheap. It may come over the wire. It may cost you a quarter. It may not be the fantasy of the virtual reality salon in your house. It may just simply come over the wire. I think the economics of it may delay or accelerate it, but that the appetite for it is so great that it is for sure on its way. What's holding it back is the technology. Because the demands that we make of our hardware when we move to VR are incredible. I mean, look at these eucalyptus trees blowing in the wind out here. Look at how each leaf has a unique reflective index of its own, which is changing in time. Think of the computational energy that would have to be brought to bear to convincingly reproduce that in a VR environment. I mean, it's orders of magnitude more computationally demanding than anything currently being done. However, instead of the computers, instead of the automobile, if it had evolved at the same rate as the computer, a car would now go 375,000 miles an hour on a nickel's worth of gas and cost you $200. So we shouldn't assume at all that we're reaching the limits of the potential limits of the computer. I'd say we're probably about halfway there. There is right now a fiber optic experimental line between the University of Michigan and the University of Minnesota that is able to transfer 630 gigabytes per second. That's the Encyclopedia Britannica in under a 30th of a second. That's bandwidth. That can handle anything. We just have to run that experimental cable into every city and home on the planet, and then we'll have it. McLuhan had an interesting idea. McLuhan's a weird character. He's a very advanced thinker, but a convert to Catholicism, so forth and so on. He finally concluded that electricity is the physical descent of the Holy Ghost into history. That as the planet, as our cities turn to light and everything is linked together informationally, that this is the enfolding presence of the third person of the Trinity. And, since electricity is a fairly mysterious item anyway, who is to say not? In practical terms, it may lead to something very, very much like that, a gathering of us all together in cyber, hyper, shamana state. Yeah. Sure, I'll describe it briefly. I tried to stay off this because I tried to keep this botanically focused. For those of you who don't know it, I have other burdens to bear other than my psychedelic advocacy, and one of them is that I am the purveyor of a theory of history which has many different aspects about it, and I've used some of the terms like novelty, ingression of novelty, contraction, but I believe that I have discovered or was told a mathematical algorithm that allows us to replace probability theory with a waveform that predicts where in time novelty will cluster and where in time very probable events should be assumed to concentrate. It's a very neat mathematical theory. It's all very solid and so forth and so on, but it has, as all theories do, what I call a hard swallow built in. To illustrate what I mean, the hard swallow in normal cosmology is called the Big Bang. If you can believe that, you'll believe anything. This is the idea that the universe sprang from nothing in a single moment for no reason. Notice that whether that's true or not, it's the limit case for credulity. I mean, if you can believe that, it's a little hard to know what you would dig your heels in on. The hard swallow in my theory is that it seems to all calculate out to prove that we're less than 18 years away from an event as dramatic as the Big Bang, but sort of the Big Bang in reverse, what I call the Big Surprise. That this process of boundary dissolution that we have been experiencing in our historical and cultural adventure is accelerating by a factor such that half of the history of the universe is going to unfold in the next 17 years. As much will happen, in other words, in the next 17 years has happened in the previous 17 or 20 billion years. That in fact history is the phenomenon which immediately precedes this event. Sort of in the way that the dilation of the cervix is the phenomenon which immediately precedes the birth of an infant. History is the indicator event that says the transcendental object hidden in the protean depths of nature is about to shed all its foils and emerge in its hyperdimensional nakedness at the end of time. And it would be a mad thing to hypothesize, except that the mathematical algorithm allows very accurate predictions of the past. Now, at first that may sound silly, but notice, it's easy to predict the future. Who the hell can naysay it? It's very difficult to predict the past because it's already happened. So whether you were right or wrong or not is going to be immediately determinable. And I believe, based on this theory's ability to describe the past, that we should take very seriously the idea that we are, in fact, the carriers of a process of universal metamorphosis that is reaching its culmination. you may find that impossible to imagine, that in 18 years the world would turn itself inside out. But I think if you sit with it a while, try to imagine that not happening. Try to imagine this world 500 years from now if we continue with business as usual and no vertical gain. It is inconceivable. We have painted ourselves into some kind of corner. I grant you my schedule is a little breathtaking, only 18 years, but I'll bet you if my schedule were 100 years, you'd feel that it was uncomfortably long indeed. Sometime in the next little while, it's going to be apparent to everybody that the human adventure is building towards some kind of quantized transition point. We are not going to wander in the miasma of techno-worship, male dominance, resource exploitation, and ever-burgeoning human population forever. It's impossible. It's a self-limiting exercise. And to the degree that we can educate ourselves and communicate with each other, we can hasten this process, or at least make it easier for the planetary culture to go through. Yes?
Metaphor of preparing for another birth. Would it be presumptuous to look at the planet coming into this North American culture and sort of like when I was getting ready to go, for about 4 hours before I started getting flooded with visions and hallucinations of going into another world and seeing that the planets in this culture and their reawakening in the last 30 years could be sort of that momentum to help move us into this new birth process.
Oh, I think so, because I think what we're going to, history is ending, but time will continue. Well, what is time without history for human beings? Well, it's the archaic. We're going back into the archaic. And apparently as central to the archaic as nuclear physics and economics is to our world was shamanism and hallucinogenic plants. So I think we're preparing to make a return. Nothing happens without a reason, and nothing is unannounced. This is something Muslim told me. It's a very interesting idea. Nothing is unannounced. If you are sensitive enough, you can never be taken by surprise, because there is always the wave which precedes the actual arrival of the event. And a lot of people talk about the end of the world, but it's almost entirely couched negatively. I feel that I am, without a doubt, the most optimistic person I have ever met or heard of. And yet, after I give some of my lectures, people come up to me and say, it was frightening. It was an appalling vision of what... He said, you missed the point. I'm telling you, God's kingdom is 18 years away. How could you possibly interpret that as negative? And say, well, but aren't you saying that everything will be changed and transformed and swept away? Well, yes, but, that's the way of it. You want a psychedelic truth? 30 years of psychedelic voicing, I can distill it for you. This is not a psychedelic truth. This is truth. Here it is. Yes. And you can learn this from drugs, you can learn it from life, you can learn it from death, you can learn it any way you like, but by God, you will learn it. Nothing lasts. Nothing lasts. Not your enemy, not your friend, not your youth, not your dreams, not your fears, not your hope, not even yourself. Nothing lasts. Well, this has been said often, but felt rarely. Heraclitus said, Panchagraya, all flows. And the lie of Western psychology is that something is stable. God's nature, the equinoctial point, something lacks. And because of this lie, we are perpetually in a state of anxiety. Because the truth of our experience is nothing less. And yet the truth that our culture tells us is, save your immortal soul, make a contribution, preserve, protect, conserve, stabilize, retain. It's pointless. And so the central truth of being is the self-presence of immediate reality. That's all you will ever have. And so the quality of the self-presence of immediate experience is what you want to impact and determine. And everything else is rumor, hearsay, hope, dream, memory, projection. But the self-presence of immediate experience, if that is not satisfying to you, you have to change your life. You have to do something. And the fact that Western psychology and civilization is a vast exercise in delayed gratification. And the consequences of that are endless unhappiness and neurosis and fetish substitution and so forth and so on for reality. It should be liberating to know that nothing lasts. But instead it paralyzes with a sense of ephemerality, when what it should do is empower an enormous sense of freedom. And I think this ability to accept the inevitable passing and coming to be of phenomena is what psychedelic wisdom is really about. Anybody, anything, get me, yeah. You mean my views on the Well, Ralph Abraham, you should visit his website.
Alright, looks like it's going to take one more short session to do her right foot. So take 4, I think, coming up. Next take, working on her feet, and then I'm going to zoom out a little bit and do another deeper layer of ivory black within the purple that I did last time. So here we go.
And I'm wondering if you would about any sort of general social regulation that has to do with governmental
On drug
issues.
It's a complicated thing because there are two levels. There is first of all the drug problem we are told we have, which is too many people are taking too many bad drugs and committing crimes in order to obtain money to buy drugs, or committing crimes in order to transport, manufacture, and deal drugs. And this has dehumanized our society, and it's a terrible scourge, and we have to do something about it. That's level 1 of the drug problem. What you are not told is that governments are the chief offenders. Most drugs in the world are either produced by governments or produced with the connivance of governments. And our little bailiwick, the psychedelics, don't even figure in this issue because not enough money is being made. The only psychedelic that ever made anybody any money was LSD. And on a scale where we're talking about methamphetamine, cocaine, and heroin, the fortunes made off of LSD were minuscule. The drug thing is a con. Governments need vast amounts of untraceable cash, they believe, because they turn it over to their secret police agencies who then pursue secret agendas where they try to control events by illicit and non-sanctioned means. And by that I mean rigging elections, murdering labor leaders, hounding liberal editors into retirement, smearing people, so forth and so on. The hard drug markets of this world are entirely in the hands of government. You know, if somebody pulls a stunt in Kuwait, and we're there in a moment, we send troops to Haiti, but these mysterious jungle warlords in Burma seem untouchable. Nothing can be done. They're beyond the reach of any army, any aerial bombing campaign. They're just mysteriously indestructible, these warlords in Burma. Well, it's because they are the producing end of an illicit, world-girdling organization whose purpose is to deliver drugs to the market. And I believe that the CIA got into this game because, you can almost say, for good reason from their point of view. The CIA in the middle 60s, as well as the rest of the American establishment, was confronted with the spectacle of black people determined to burn down the core of every city in America until they got social justice. The decision was made to bring hundreds of tons of chemically, pharmaceutically pure China white number 3 heroin into those ghettos and just basically dump it on the ground and see what happened. And it totally broke the back of black radicalism and turned everybody into a junkie or a gangster somewhere in that system. Well, then when we lost the Vietnam War, the way the geopolitical thing came down was Khomeini got the heroin industry, and China white was traded in for Iranian brown, a lower grade of heroin. Well, since Khomeini is not a nice man in our pantheon, heroin suddenly became, highly repressed. But at the same time, as the Vietnam War wound down, these insurgencies in South America were being started up, and cocaine was brought onto the scene. And I can remember in like 72, 73, 74, a particular cover of Time magazine, cocaine, the new drug of choice. And it was just this far short of an endorsement. It was all about movie stars were doing it, and everybody was doing it, a huge picture of lines on the cover. That's a decision to sell. That's an ad campaign, a very high-profile ad campaign. Well, I think I said to you yesterday, in the international drug trade, the real cost of these drugs is in transporting them. Because you have to pay somebody to bring 10 kilos of heroin into the United States, unless you know fools, you're going to have to pay them $40,000 or $50,000, a fraction of the worth of that heroin. But nevertheless, if you haven't sold it yet, maybe it's tricky to get that kind of scratch together. Well, that's for 10 kilos of junk. You have to pay $50,000 to transport it. But if you have a C-130, you can bring 50,000 pounds of heroin, and it will cost you far less per unit volume. So the CIA had all these airplanes, and they simply diverted them to the drug trade. You probably have been following this recent scandal involving the U.S. Forest Service. It's been in the papers here. It's been well rehearsed in Hawaii. Well, as you know, the U.S. Forest Service uses C-130s to drop fire-retardant chemicals on forest fires. When the Air Force was downsizing 3 years ago, the Forest Service requisitioned 15 C-130s. By manipulating paperwork and painting out serial numbers and painting on other serial numbers, only 3 of those C-130s ever reached the Forest Service. The other 12 mysteriously disappeared. Do you know what a C-130 looks like? Do you know how hard it is to lose one of those puppies? 12 of them disappeared without a trace. Well, guess where? And guess what they're lugging back and forth. Now, the CIA itself is addicted to the money. The original impulse, break the back of black radicalism, has been replaced by a more obvious impulse, make a lot of money. Where do you get a quick $1 billion if you need it in a hurry? It's called, you take a floater on drugs. That's what you do. And the amount of money is so great that anyone can be corrupted. These boats that come up from Colombia that lie off the coast of Florida, the so-called mothership, a guy with a fast cigarette boat can make 3 trips to and from one of those motherships on a cloudy night. The standard pay for one of those trips, which takes about 40 minutes, is $125,000. You can make $375,000 a night doing this, and you're not a player, you're not a kingpin, you're not a major figure, you're a totally disposable peon. So imagine how much money there is to be made at the top. Who can refuse a $10 million bribe? You know, people come in and say, listen, we'd like to give you $10 million and we bought a house for you in the highlands of Malaysia and a Ferrari, and we'd just like you to go and live there and do whatever you want. And the choice is a bullet in the head. So which would you prefer? We're perfectly at ease either way, so you figure it out and call us back. Nobody can resist that kind of thing. So we're in a situation where we are being radically manipulated by governments because they are addicted to a style of piratical rogue capitalism that is just simply the greatest windfall ever imagined. I mean, there has never been anything like the modern illicit drug trade in the history of the world. 10 years ago, the drug trade and the international arms trade were on a par with each other. Today, the international drug trade makes 10 times as much money as the international arms trade, and there's no end in sight.
And in general, social kinds of governmental pressure on that certain thoughts about these ones we just tried, and there seems to be people now.
All right, now let's zoom out a bit and get those darks darker in the cores.
Some of you may know Bobby Faust in New York. He's an interesting guy. He has an idea. He says that he advocates something that he calls civil obedience. He says not civil disobedience, but civil obedience. He says everybody who smokes pot should take their pot on a certain day and march down to the cop shop and demand that justice be done. And that if everybody who smokes pot did that, the courts would be so clogged, the entire madness of the whole thing would be exposed for everyone to see, and it would just be impossible to enforce. That's a strategic idea. It might work. From observing American society as long as I have, it's very clear to me they don't hand out rights around here. The only people who have any rights are people who demand them. And you can look at how black people broke free in the 60s. You can look at how the gay community got itself together in the 70s and 80s. And apparently, unless you're willing to stand up for what you are, you're going to be forever stigmatized. It was black people, they couldn't escape it. the reflectivity of their skin marks them. But it was very, very courageous for gay people, many of whom were way in the closet and doing well in straight society, to risk all that and say, no, look, this is what's going on. This is who I am. Now, if there's a problem, it's your problem, not my problem. And homosexuality was a crime in many states, in most states, just as drugs are. So I think really, if we're serious, we're going to have to risk something. We're going to have to risk our jobs, our reputations, perhaps some of our friendships, and just say, look, this is what it is. Now, if you don't like it, don't do it. But don't legislate for the rest of us. Society is a very complex enterprise, and what's good for you may not be good for me. And if it's to be done in mass action, that's better. We all feel better if we march in a group than if we march alone. But we drug people are incredibly, we fold too easily, I think. I think we feel great shame on some level about what we've done. And it's very hard to stand up to a really straight person and say, yeah, no, I didn't try it. I just did it 10 minutes ago. We're not talking about my wild college days. We're talking about 35 seconds before I stood in your presence. And see, I'm not falling down. I'm not about to commit murder. I'm just like you are, except I have this different preference and force that. And it's the task of a generation. You know, the right wing, they understand far better than we do. I mean, when Pat Buchanan says it's cultural war, he's talking about us. We're the counterculture. We're the enemy. And the response of a desperate foe is an ever more desperate lashing out. And Christianity is not going to go quietly into that good night. It's going to get nuttier as it approaches its terminal delirium. The killing of abortion doctors is a good example. What does that do for the right?
All right, so that reinforces the light of the sun as well, or moon, whatever's going on there, and gets some deeper darks into the background. Starting to layer that up, and now we have a nice, fresh first coat of light and shadow on the kernels of the rye woman, which has a long way to go still. Next step, I'm guessing, will be a very thin Payne's gray glaze and start reinforcing the shadows, and then a highlight layer, and then back and forth, and eventually it'll look right. But for the moment, that is it. That is Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting Medusa's crown. Have a good night, Earth.